The stepmother was yelling at the girl, who cried as she tried to eat from the floor. With trembling hands and a desperate heart, the cold voice echoed through the room, "If you want to eat, then eat from the floor." And the silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the door opening. The millionaire father entered, and what he did next. The mansion stood as a monument to silence, an immaculate white fortress against the lush green of meticulously manicured grounds. Within its walls, the air was thin, scented with fresh lilies and polished beeswax. Every object occupied its place with an almost mathematical precision. The sterling silver aligned on the mahogany table, the crystal gleaming under the soft light of a Venetian chandelier, the priceless works of art hanging on walls of purest white. Everything was perfect, a tangible representation of the immense fortune that Arthur, the patriarch of the house, had built. He was a man who understood numbers, investments, and the cash flow that kept his empire in constant expansion, but he had forgotten how to decipher the silent language of his own daughter's heart. Since his wife had passed, Arthur had taken refuge in the only world he could still control, that of business, of stocks on the exchange, and of the profits that accumulated in his bank account, expressed in dollars and euros. At the center of that cold splendor lived a small, lonely soul. Olivia, with her 6 years and honey-colored eyes, moved through the house like a shadow, a whisper of life in a mausoleum of opulence. She had learned not to make noise, not to touch the expensive vases, and to keep her little blue dress always impeccable. Above all, she had learned to fear the sound of her stepmother's footsteps. Veronica, her father's new wife, was a woman of stunning beauty, with a smile that could charm investors and rivals alike, but whose brilliance never reached her eyes. When Arthur was present, Veronica was the personification of sweetness, an angel of patience and affection. But Arthur's business trips were long and frequent, and in his absence, Veronica's mask of kindness would dissolve, revealing a cutting coldness. That evening, the ritual repeated itself. The dining table was set for two: Veronica and a financial advisor who had come to discuss the returns on Arthur's latest investments. Olivia watched from the dark threshold of the kitchen doorway, her designated place during meals. Her stomach rumbled, but she dared not approach. "Clumsy children and expensive china don't mix," Veronica had told her once, her voice like velvet wrapped around a whip. The housekeeper, Eliza, a lady with wrinkled hands and a generous heart, placed a plate with a little rice and chicken on the kitchen counter for the girl. Her eyes met Olivia's for an instant, conveying a universe of apology and helplessness. Eliza was the only source of warmth in that house, but her power was limited. Once, she had tried to argue, suggesting the girl sit at a small table in the corner of the dining room. Veronica's response had been immediate and glacial. "Is your loyalty to this job or to a spoiled child? Don't force me to make a choice." The veiled threat had silenced the housekeeper, who now limited herself to secret gestures of affection. Olivia took her plate and sat on a small stool in the darkest corner of the kitchen. The sound of laughter from the dining room seemed to come from another world. She heard Veronica talk about the family's growing assets, the importance of diversifying, and how gold remained a safe harbor. They were words the girl didn't understand, but she felt their weight. The same weight that kept her there, alone, with a plate of cold food in her lap. She chewed slowly, each bite a reminder of her invisibility. Suddenly, the kitchen door swung open. Veronica entered, the smile still on her lips, but her eyes were 2 chips of ice. She looked at Olivia's nearly untouched plate, and her voice, low and controlled, cut through the silence. "Not eating, darling. I thought you were hungry. It seems I'll have to find a more effective way to whet your appetite." The next morning was born with a golden light that poured through the immense windows, making dust motes dance in brilliant beams. It was the kind of day that promised joy, but inside the mansion, the atmosphere remained frigid. Veronica sat in her white velvet armchair, phone pressed to her ear, her voice a murmur of efficiency and charm. She was discussing the profitability of a new investment fund with the bank manager, using terms like net worth and low-risk assets with an impressive fluency. To the outside world, she was the ideal partner for a multimillionaire, a woman who not only enjoyed the wealth but understood it, helping to multiply the family's capital. Olivia sat on the Persian rug a few feet away with a box of colored pencils and a sheet of paper. She was drawing a small house with a garden full of misshapen flowers and a smiling sun in the corner of the page. It was the house from her memories, a place that smelled of pound cake and her mother's perfume. When Veronica hung up the phone, her professional smile vanished. Her eyes fell on Olivia's drawing, and a line of disdain formed between her perfect eyebrows. "What is that?" she asked, the casual tone barely disguising her criticism. "It's my house," Olivia whispered, not looking up. "This is your house now," Veronica corrected, her voice sharp. "And in this house, we don't settle for childish scribbles. We aspire to greatness, to perfection." She stood, and as she passed, her silk skirt brushed against the paper, smudging the yellow sun Olivia had just finished drawing. The girl's shoulders slumped. The small moment of happiness turned to dust. To Veronica, the child was a liability in her perfectly calculated life, an unwelcome variable that stained the image of success and control she worked so hard to maintain. At lunchtime, Eliza went out of her way. She prepared creamy mashed potatoes, shredded chicken with vegetables, and a small, colorful salad. It was Olivia's favorite meal, and the housekeeper arranged it with care, making a smiley face with the vegetables on top of the potatoes. She handed it to the girl in the kitchen with a conspiratorial wink. "Eat up, sweetheart, you need to be strong." Olivia smiled, a rare, genuine smile, and picked up her fork. But before she could take the first bite, Veronica entered the kitchen. Her gaze swept over the plate and then fixed on Eliza with accusing intensity. "What did I say about wasting good food?" she said, her voice low. "She doesn't deserve a feast. She needs to learn the value of things." With a swift motion, she took the plate from Olivia's trembling hands and scraped its contents harshly into the trash can. In its place, she put down a plate with a slice of dry bread and a glass of water. "This is sufficient. It will teach her humility." Olivia stared at the trash, her eyes filling with tears, watching her colorful lunch disappear under coffee grounds. Later, while the house was quiet, Eliza went to take out the trash. Something compelled her to look inside the bag, and there it was, almost untouched, the plate she had prepared with so much love. The smiley face of vegetables was still faintly visible beneath the coffee dregs. A wave of cold washed over her. It wasn't just cruelty, it was a sadistic game. Veronica wasn't just punishing the girl, she was making sure that even gestures of kindness were corrupted and turned into garbage. In that moment, Eliza understood the depth of the malice that inhabited that house. She looked at the back door, her heart hammering in her chest. The fear of losing her job was real, but the image of that plate in the trash lit a flame of rebellion inside her. She could no longer be a silent spectator, but what could a simple housekeeper do against a billionaire's wife? A woman who controlled every cent and every breath within that fortress of money and power. The revolt that bloomed in Eliza's heart did not extinguish with the sunrise. Instead, it nestled into her thoughts, giving her a new and dangerous determination. She couldn't confront Veronica directly. It would be the end of her. She had to act in the shadows, to weave a web of care and resistance around Olivia, using the only weapon she possessed, discretion. That morning, as she prepared breakfast, the scent of fresh bread filling the kitchen, she discreetly wrapped 2 soft slices in a cloth napkin and hid them in the pocket of her apron. Later, while tidying the girl's room, She found Olivia sitting on the floor, clutching a worn teddy bear, the only toy left from her previous life. The girl's eyes were dull, void of any childish joy. Eliza knelt beside her, her heart aching. "I have something for you," she whispered, pulling the bread from her pocket. Olivia's eyes widened. It was a treasure. She took the bread with both hands, as if it were the most precious thing in the world, and took a small bite. The simple, comforting taste seemed to bring a little color back to her pale cheeks. "It's our secret," Eliza said, putting a finger to her lips. "Don't tell anyone." Olivia nodded solemnly, her mouth full of bread. That small act of subversion became a daily ritual. Eliza found creative ways to smuggle food to the girl's room. An apple hidden under a pile of clothes, a cookie tucked inside a book, a glass of milk left in the bathroom during the night. They were crumbs of affection, small gestures that fed not only Olivia's body, but her hope. The girl began to look forward to these moments, her eyes seeking Eliza's across the house, sharing a secret that bound them against Veronica's silent tyranny. Meanwhile, Veronica continued to orchestrate her perfect life. That day, she was hosting two important guests for lunch. A Swiss investor interested in one of Arthur's companies and his wife. The house was impeccable, the flowers fresh, and the table set with the finest china. Veronica moved through the living room, adjusting a vase here, a cushion there, the personification of a graceful hostess. She knew that every detail mattered. Every gesture was a piece in the complex game of maintaining and expanding the family's assets. Money, for Veronica, wasn't just comfort, it was power. It was status. It was the validation of her very existence. She had married into Arthur's fortune, and she would do anything to ensure her position remained unassailable. Olivia was instructed to stay in her room during the lunch, out of the visitors' sight. "I don't want you bothering them with your silly games," Veronica said, her tone falsely sweet. But fate had other plans. During lunch, as Veronica charmed her guests with stories about her cryptocurrency investments and the impressive growth of Arthur's businesses, the investor's wife's linen napkin slipped from her lap and fell to the floor. Before anyone could react, Veronica saw an opportunity. With a bright smile, she called out, "Olivia, darling, come here for a moment." The girl appeared at the doorway, hesitant. "Be a good girl and pick up the napkin for Mrs. Dubois," Veronica said, her voice melodic. Olivia looked at the woman, then at the floor. It was a simple request, but Veronica's tone turned it into something else. The guest smiled, finding the scene charming. Olivia bent down, her cheeks flushing with shame. As she picked up the napkin, she heard Veronica's soft laugh and the sentence that followed, delivered as if it were the most innocent of pleasantries. "She's so helpful. Always practicing to be a good little hostess, isn't she?" The investor and his wife chuckled, oblivious to the veiled cruelty in those words. But Olivia understood. She felt the weight of the humiliation, the feeling of being a prop in her stepmother's theater. She handed over the napkin and fled back down the hall, the sound of laughter echoing in her ears. Each laugh a small knife in her heart. The humiliation of the lunch left an invisible scar on Olivia. She spent the rest of the afternoon in her room, quiet, refusing even the piece of chocolate cake Eliza tried to offer her in secret. The housekeeper watched from a distance, her heart heavy with a guilt that wasn't hers. She saw the light of childhood dimming in the girl's eyes, replaced by a frightened resignation no child should ever know. Eliza felt trapped in a web of powerlessness, an employee in a house where morality was a luxury item, far less valuable than the paintings on the wall or the bonds that yielded monthly interest and dividends. Her loyalty to Arthur was deep. He had given her a job when she needed it most, but her loyalty to the memory of his first wife and to the child who was the fruit of that love screamed louder in her conscience. She polished the silverware. the sound of the cloth against the metal echoing the conflict in her mind. Each piece was a reminder of the vast wealth surrounding her, an ocean of money that couldn't buy a single drop of compassion. The next morning, the phone rang, shattering the tense quiet of the mansion. It was Arthur's direct line, a sound that always made Veronica compose herself, straightening her posture and her smile. She answered with the velvety voice she reserved for him. On the other end of the line, Arthur's voice sounded tired but held a note of euphoria. "I closed the deal, darling. One of the biggest of my career. The cash flow this is going to generate, it's monumental." Veronica exhaled, a performance of relief and pride. "Oh, Arthur, that's fantastic. I knew you could do it. Your net worth seems to have no ceiling." She listened as he detailed the operation, talking about stock options and the acquisition of a new tech company. Then his voice changed, growing softer. "I miss home. I miss you both. I've cancelled my last meetings. I'll be home in 2 days." Veronica's heart leaped, a syncopated beat of pure panic. 2 days. It was far too soon. "And I want one thing," he continued. "No guests, no business, just a family dinner, the three of us, the way we should be." The phrase hung in the air, laden with a hope that, to Veronica, sounded like a sentence. But of course, "My love," she said, her voice a model of sweetness and enthusiasm. "It will be perfect. Olivia and I will get everything ready. She'll be thrilled." She motioned for Olivia, who was nearby, to come closer. "Say hello to Daddy, dear." Olivia took the phone, her small hand trembling. "Hi, Daddy." "Hi, my princess. I'm coming home," the distant voice said. A small smile bloomed on the girl's lips before Veronica took the phone back for the final goodbyes. As soon as she hung up, Veronica's smile shattered like glass. Arthur's relief was her terror. A family dinner, just the three of them. It meant no distractions, no guests to charm, no talk of investments to divert attention. It would be just her, Arthur, and the girl, the living proof of her failure to build the perfect family her marriage's image demanded. Eliza, dusting furniture in the hallway, overheard the conversation. A wave of hope washed over her. Her employer's return was Olivia's only chance of salvation. But when she peeked through the doorway and saw the expression on Veronica's face, that hope turned to an icy fear. Her mistress's look was not one of happiness, but of cold, calculating fury. She turned slowly, and her eyes landed on Olivia, who was now smiling at her teddy bear, whispering that Daddy was coming back. The girl's smile was the most dangerous thing in the world at that moment. Veronica approached. The click of her heels on the marble like the small taps of a hammer. She crouched down, her face inches from Olivia's, and her voice was a venomous whisper. "Your father wants a perfect dinner, and you, my dear, will be the star of the show. We'll start your training right now." The 2 days leading up to Arthur's return dragged on with the slowness of torture. Veronica's training began the next morning, and the grand dining room became her stage. She dismissed Eliza's services there, insisting on personally handling Olivia's education. The mahogany table, long and polished like a dark mirror, was empty, but to Olivia, it felt like a tribunal. Veronica forced her to sit in her chair for hours on end, teaching her to maintain a straight posture, her hands delicately placed in her lap, her chin held high. "A lady does not slouch," she would say, her voice a monotonous, relentless hum as she circled the table. "She occupies her space with grace and silence, especially silence. Any false move, a slumped shoulder or a stray glance, was corrected with a cold touch on her arm or a sharp word that stung more than a slap. For Veronica, this was a matter of risk management. Her life with Arthur was her greatest investment, a long-term holding that guaranteed her access to an incalculable fortune. Olivia was a liability, a volatile variable that could depreciate her value in her husband's eyes. As she mentally reviewed the dividends from her stocks and the performance of her funds, she applied the same cold logic to the girl. One had to control, shape, and if necessary, suppress any imperfection that could threaten future profits. The image of a happy, perfect family was the most important asset she possessed, and she would not allow a melancholic child to ruin the profitability of her marriage. The dinner was not a celebration. It was a presentation for the primary shareholder in her life. Eliza watched from afar, her heart a stone in her chest. She saw Olivia sitting at the table, her small body rigid, her face pale and expressionless. She once tried to intervene, entering the room with the excuse of needing to clean the crystal in the cabinet. "Ma'am, perhaps the girl needs a rest, a bit of fresh air," she began, her voice trembling. Veronica turned slowly, a glacial smile on her lips. "Thank you for your concern, Eliza, but we are busy with something far more valuable than fresh air. We are building character. Now, if you'll excuse us, your presence here is unnecessary." The message was clear, an invisible wall erected between her and the child. Defeated, Eliza retreated. But the image of the small prisoner in her luxurious chair was seared into her mind. The lessons grew crueler. Veronica began rehearsing dialogue. She would place an empty plate in front of Olivia and ask questions. "Is the food good, dear?" And Olivia had to answer with a smile. "Yes, Mrs. Veronica, it's delicious." "Are you happy your father is back?" "Yes, Daddy, I'm very happy." Each answer was repeated dozens of times until the tone, the smile, and the light in her eyes were, in Veronica's opinion, perfect. The girl's spontaneity was sanded away, polished into a hollow performance. The hope that her father's call had kindled in her chest was being systematically extinguished, replaced by the fear of getting her lines wrong. On the night before Arthur's arrival, the house smelled of roasted meat and spices, a promise of a feast that sounded like a threat. Veronica took Olivia to her room, her preparatory work nearly complete. She knelt in front of the girl, holding her face between her cold hands. Her eyes, a deep blue, seemed to suck all the light from the room. "Tomorrow night," she whispered, her voice dangerously soft, "you will be the most perfect little girl in the world, and if you are not, remember the little roles Eliza gives you. Remember how sad your only friend would be if she had to go away. Far, far away." Veronica's threat hung in the air like an odorless poison, and Olivia breathed it in with every moment. The day of the dinner dawned not with the promise of a happy reunion, but with the certainty of a terrifying performance. The mansion, usually silent, became a hive of frantic activity. Florists came and went with extravagant arrangements. A catering team took over the kitchen with gleaming copper pots, and the entire house was polished until it shone with an impersonal splendor. Arthur had asked for a family dinner, but Veronica had turned it into an event. For her, celebrating her husband's business success was a golden opportunity to solidify her own position, to exhibit her competence as a hostess and mistress of a vast fortune. It was an investment in her image, and she managed every detail with the precision of someone analyzing the profitability of a stock portfolio. Olivia was dressed in a sky-blue organza dress with ribbon bows on the shoulders. She looked like a porcelain doll, fragile and silent. Eliza helped her dress, her rough fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted the collar. No words were exchanged, only a desperate look from the housekeeper that the girl understood perfectly. Veronica's threat had created a chasm between them. Any gesture of comfort could cost Eliza her job and her home. Olivia felt the weight of that responsibility. To protect Eliza, she had to obey. She had to be the perfect girl. She sat on the edge of her bed, her small hands clasped in her lap, and waited, her heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She was no longer a child waiting for her father. She was an actress waiting for her cue to go on stage. When the guests began to arrive, the house filled with loud voices, laughter, and the clinking of crystal glasses. They were Arthur's friends and business partners, men and women who spoke a language Olivia didn't understand. but felt. They spoke of profits, of dollars, of how the crypto market was volatile but promising, of deals that turned capital into more capital. Wealth was a palpable presence in the room, an expensive perfume mixed with that of the lilies. Veronica floated between the groups, her smile radiant, her posture impeccable. She was the queen of this universe, the guardian of the treasure. When Arthur finally arrived, he looked tired from his trip, but his face lit up when he saw the party in his honor. He hugged Veronica, who whispered something in his ear, likely a plausible explanation for the crowd. He accepted it, immediately surrounded by people congratulating him on his latest success. Finally, it was time for dinner. The guests moved to the dining room, where the long table gleamed under the light of the chandeliers. A feast fit for a king. Veronica came to get Olivia. She held her hand with a strength that belied her smile. "Remember what we rehearsed," she whispered. She positioned the girl near the entrance to the room, slightly away from the table, and handed her a small, empty plate. "Stand here, smile. Your father needs to see how happy you are." Olivia obeyed. From her post, she could see her father sitting at the head of the table, laughing at a joke told by a man with a grey mustache. He seemed so close, yet light years away. The aroma of food began to rise, torturing her empty stomach. She saw the waiters serve the first course, a velvety soup in porcelain bowls. An uncontrollable urge, a hunger that was more for belonging than for food, overcame her. Forgetting her orders, she took a hesitant step toward the table. It was enough. Veronica, who had been watching her with the eyes of a hawk, moved with the speed of a snake. She interposed herself between Olivia and Arthur's line of sight, the smile still on her face. Crouching down, the expensive fabric of her dress brushing the floor, her voice was a sweetened poison, heard only by Olivia. "You want to eat? Then eat off the floor." Veronica's words, "then eat off the floor," were not a shout, but a frozen whisper that pierced Olivia's soul deeper than any blow. For an instant, the world seemed to stop. The sound of lively conversation, the clinking of silverware on china, all faded to a distant hum. The girl's brain refused to process the command. She looked at her stepmother's face, a face of flawless beauty and a charming smile, searching for any trace of a joke, any sign that those words were not real. But Veronica's eyes were as hard and cold as the marble beneath her feet. There was no escape. Fear, an icy knot in her stomach, mingled with hunger. She thought of Eliza, of the veiled threat, and knew she had no choice. Humiliation was the price for her only friend's security. With torturous slowness, Olivia bent her knees. The expensive fabric of her blue dress crumpled onto the cold floor. Every eye in the dining room turned to her. Veronica, sensing the attention, acted with the mastery of a seasoned actress. "Oh, how clumsy of me!" she exclaimed with a light laugh. "I've dropped a piece of my amuse-bouche." With a subtle movement, she pushed a small cracker with pâté near where Olivia was with the tip of her shoe. "Be an angel, dear, and pick that up for me. We wouldn't want to dirty this marvelous floor." The guests smiled, interpreting the scene as a quaint moment, an eccentricity of a multi-millionaire family. They saw a pretty girl in a blue dress kneeling on the floor and thought it adorable, a little piece of domestic theatre. They didn't see the cruelty, only the wealth and power that made everything acceptable. The tears Olivia had held back for so long began to burn in her eyes. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against the cracker. Shame was a hot wave rising up her neck. She could feel the stares, hear the muffled chuckles. Between sobs she tried to swallow. A murmur escaped her lips, almost inaudible. "I just wanted to eat with you." At that moment, from the kitchen doorway, Eliza watched the scene unfold. The blood boiled in her veins. The fear for her job, for her own livelihood, was incinerated by a wave of pure indignation. She took a step forward, her voice coming out louder than she intended. "Ma'am, please. She's just a child." The abrupt intervention made a few guests turn. Veronica shot Eliza a death glare, but her smile remained intact for her audience. "Eliza, dear, don't be so dramatic," she said, her chiding tone disguised as levity. "It's just a lesson in the value of things, a lesson all of us who have built a fortune understand well." The excuse was perfect. The guests chuckled, and Eliza was relegated to the role of an overly sensitive maid. Olivia picked up the small cracker, the food now a symbol of her complete subjugation. Tears streamed freely down her face, dripping onto the polished floor. The sound of her quiet crying was the only dissonant note in the symphony of success and celebration. The air in the room suddenly grew heavy, the guests' joy a little more forced. The scene, which had once seemed charming, now had an edge of strangeness, of something out of place. Time seemed to stretch, each second an eternity of humiliation for the kneeling girl. It was then, at the height of that tense silence, that a sound cut through the air like a blade, the heavy, unmistakable sound of the great oak front door swinging open. Every face turned to the entrance. Arthur stood on the threshold, his leather briefcase still in hand, his shoulders slumped with the fatigue of his journey. His gaze swept the room, first with surprise at the unexpected party, then with growing confusion. He had expected the quiet of a home, the warmth of an intimate dinner. Instead, he found a hall full of strangers and a tense atmosphere that was almost palpable. His brain, accustomed to analyzing balance sheets and profit projections in seconds, took a moment to process the scene before him. He saw the lavish table, the chandeliers, the smiling faces that were now freezing into masks of shock. And then he saw her, on the marble floor, a small patch of sky blue. It was Olivia, his daughter, kneeling, her face stained with tears, her dirty hands clutching a piece of food. Arthur's world, a solid universe built on the cold logic of numbers, capital and financial assets, fractured. The sound of the room disappeared. The fatigue of his trip evaporated, replaced by an ice that climbed his spine and settled in his heart. He dropped the briefcase. The dull thud of leather on the marble floor was the only sound in the sepulchral silence that fell over the dinner. No one dared to breathe. The guests, once laughing accomplices, were now statues of embarrassment. Forks paused midway to their mouths. Veronica's mask faltered. For the first time, a genuine panic flashed in her eyes. She stood quickly, her smile forced and trembling. "Arthur, darling, you're early. We were just playing a game. Olivia is so dramatic sometimes." Her voice, normally so controlled, held a shrill note of desperation. She tried to move toward him, to block his view, to control the narrative as she always did. But Arthur didn't see her. It was as if she had become invisible. His eyes were fixed on the small, huddled figure of his daughter. He took one step forward, then another. Each step was slow, deliberate, the sound of his shoes on the marble echoing like a judgment. The disbelief on his face gave way to a cold, contained fury, far more terrifying than any shout. This was the face his business rivals feared. The look of a man who saw his most precious asset, his only inheritance of true love, desecrated and humiliated in his own home. He, the billionaire who controlled an empire, who moved markets with a single decision, had failed to protect what was irreplaceable. The scene before him was a liability he had never calculated, a moral bankruptcy no fortune could cover. He walked past Veronica without a glance, his indifference a slap more powerful than any accusation. He stopped directly in front of Olivia and knelt slowly, the expensive fabric of his suit brushing the floor. They were on the same level now. He saw up close the dirt on her hands, the tear tracks on her cheeks, the tremor in her small lips. The fork she held clattered against the plate with a small click, the sound magnified by the silence. Olivia looked up, and Arthur's heart broke into 1,000 pieces. In his daughter's honey-colored eyes, he saw the reflection of his own neglect. She didn't look frightened of his fury. There was only an infinite sadness and a trembling thread of hope. With a voice choked with tears, a voice so small it could barely be heard, she asked the question that shattered what was left of that night and the life he had built. "Daddy, can I eat at the table too?" Olivia's question, so simple and so devastatingly complex, echoed in Arthur's mind and demolished in seconds the fortress of pride and rationality he had built around himself. In that instant, he saw the truth with blinding clarity. He saw the long business trips, the rushed phone calls, the weekends dedicated to analyzing profitability reports and the cash flow of his companies. He saw how he had become a master of accumulating wealth, of managing a vast portfolio of dollars, gold, and stocks, but had proven a complete failure at protecting his one true inheritance, his daughter. Every million added to his bank account had been another brick in the wall that separated him from her. Guilt hit him not like a wave, but like a lightning strike, leaving him hollow and exposed. The pain on his daughter's face was a liability he could never repay, a compounding interest of his own neglect. The fury that rose in his chest was not hot and explosive, but cold, focused, and lethal. It was the same focused energy he used to dismantle competitors on the stock market. But now it was aimed at the woman he had brought into his home. He stood up. The movement was so abrupt that the heavy mahogany chair scraped against the floor with a sound that tore through the silence. Veronica, seeing the storm gathering in his eyes, desperately attempted one last act of control. "Arthur, darling, let's not make a scene in front of our friends," she began, reaching out to touch his arm. He recoiled from her touch, as if it burned, the contempt in his gaze making her step back. Without a word, he walked to the head of the table. With a single, swift and violent motion, he swept aside the fine china plates, the sterling silver cutlery, and the crystal glasses. The sound of expensive objects crashing and shattering was the explosion everyone had been waiting for. Ignoring the chaos, he returned to where Olivia was still kneeling, a small, frightened bird in the middle of the storm. He lifted her into his arms, and the feeling of her small body trembling against his chest was the final punishment. He carried her to the head of the table, to his chair, the throne of his domestic empire, and placed her there with a gentleness that contrasted brutally with his earlier fury. The guests watched, paralyzed, as the scene unfolded. Arthur took the most beautiful plate from the table, the one holding the juiciest portion of the roast, and placed it in front of his daughter. He served her himself, cutting the meat into small pieces. Then he turned to the silent room, his eyes meeting everyone's, one by one, before they settled on Veronica. His voice, when he spoke, was low but laden with the weight of unquestionable authority. "Here," he said, pointing to Olivia. "Her place is here." Veronica turned pale, her mask of elegance finally shattered, revealing the naked face of fear and humiliation. "Arthur, I can explain," she stammered, but he cut her off, his voice now louder, resonating through the room for all to hear clearly. "No luxury, no fortune, no business deal is worth more than the respect for this child." The declaration hung in the air, a public condemnation. The embarrassment in the room was unbearable. Guests began to rise, murmuring apologies, eager to flee the social implosion. Within minutes, the room emptied, leaving behind only the disordered table, the heavy silence, and the three central figures of the drama: Arthur, standing beside his daughter; Olivia, sitting in his chair, staring at the plate of food as if it were a miracle; and Veronica, standing alone in the middle of the room. Arthur waited until the last guest had left. Then he turned to Veronica, and for the first time, she saw in her husband's eyes not an investor but a judge, and the judgment was just beginning. The next morning brought not sun, but a heavy, grey sky that seemed to mirror the moral hangover inside the mansion. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant sound of Eliza sweeping up shards of crystal in the dining room. The wreckage of the previous night was a physical testament to the emotional ruin that had set in. Arthur hadn't slept. He had spent the night in his study, the computer screen glowing with charts showing the exponential growth of his portfolio, the steady rise of his stock values, the impressive profitability of his investments. But for the first time in his life, the numbers seemed empty, insulting. He, a man who prided himself on his ability to predict market trends and manage billions in assets, had failed to see the bankruptcy occurring under his own roof. His daughter's silent weeping was a liability no fortune could ever cover. When he came down for breakfast, he found Olivia sitting alone at the kitchen table, a place she had chosen out of habit. Eliza had served her a glass of milk and bread with jam. Arthur stopped at the doorway, his heart tight. The distance between them felt like a chasm. With hesitant steps, he approached, pulled out a chair, and sat across from her. "Good morning, Princess," he said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Olivia just nodded, her eyes fixed on her plate. Arthur stood up, went to the counter, took a plate, and served himself the same bread and jam. The gesture was simple, mundane, but for both of them, it was monumental. He ate in silence, feeling the weight of the girl's scared, confused gaze. He knew that trust, like a great deal of capital, was hard to build and terrifyingly easy to lose. And he had liquidated his. It was then that Veronica appeared. She was impeccably dressed, her makeup perfect, the armor of perfection back in place. She ignored Olivia and addressed Arthur with a controlled voice, as if in a business meeting. "Arthur, we need to discuss last night's disaster. You humiliated me. You humiliated yourself. What will our partners think? This was a terrible move for our business interests." He looked at her, his weariness giving way to a cold clarity. "Our business interests," he repeated, his voice low. "The only thing that matters to me in this house is not a business, and she is no longer under your management." Veronica laughed, a joyless sound. "Don't be ridiculous. I am your wife. I run this household." Arthur shook his head slowly. "Not anymore." He stood up and called for Eliza, who appeared at the doorway, her face pale with apprehension. "Eliza," Arthur began, his voice firm and clear, "as of today, you are the head housekeeper of this estate. You will be responsible for everything, the staff, the purchasing, the routine. Your primary directive is to ensure that Olivia is happy and safe. You will report directly to me. Your salary will be tripled to reflect your new responsibilities." Eliza gaped, her eyes filling with tears of disbelief. Veronica, on the other hand, turned livid. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a mask of fury. "You can't do this," she hissed. "This is an insult." Arthur ignored her and continued, looking at Eliza. "Your first task is to hire another assistant for yourself, and I want you to arrange a new menu. From today on, all meals will be family meals. The three of us, here in the kitchen or in the dining room, together." Eliza's promotion wasn't just an act of justice, it was a complete restructuring of power within the mansion. Arthur was transferring the most important asset, control of the home, from Veronica's hands to someone he trusted. Veronica watched the scene, paralyzed. She had been deposed, demoted within her own home. Her power, her authority, had all been transferred to the maid. She looked at Arthur, at Eliza, and at the girl, and a new kind of calculation began to form in her mind. If she could no longer control the house, she would have to find a new strategy, a new investment to secure her future. The war wasn't over. It had just moved to a new battlefield. The days that followed were strange, suspended in a new reality. The mansion, once governed by Veronica's cold precision, began to breathe differently. Under Eliza's management, a subtle warmth began to seep into the rooms. The smell of orange cake baking in the oven replaced the impersonal scent of lilies. Small changes happened everywhere. A vase of daisies picked from the garden appeared on the kitchen table. The classical music Veronica insisted on was replaced by a radio tuned to a soft melody station, and the doors, once almost always closed, now remained open. Arthur cancelled all his trips and appointments. He spent his days at home, a constant, slightly awkward presence. He would sit in his study, but instead of focusing on stock market charts or investment fund reports, his eyes would constantly drift to the door, hoping to see the small figure of his daughter pass by. Olivia, for her part, navigated this new world with the caution of someone stepping on unfamiliar ground. The newfound freedom was almost as frightening as the previous tyranny. She still spoke in whispers and moved along the edges of rooms as if afraid to break the spell. Eliza, now with the authority of a true administrator, tried to build a bridge between father and daughter. She organized meals with motherly care, always including Olivia's favorite dishes and encouraging Arthur to make conversation. The first few dinners were marked by an awkward silence. Arthur, the man who negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, didn't know how to talk to his own daughter. He would ask about her day, and she would answer in monosyllables. He tried to tell her about his work, but words like stocks, dividends, and net worth sounded empty and meaningless at that table. Meanwhile, Veronica moved through the house like an elegant, resentful ghost. Stripped of her domestic power, she barricaded herself in her room, spending hours on the phone with her lawyers and financial consultants. She was not a woman who accepted defeat. If the marriage, her primary asset, was in decline, it was time to diversify and protect her capital. She began to plan her exit, not as a victim, but as a shrewd investor, liquidating an unfavorable position to minimize losses and maximize gains. She coldly calculated her share of the fortune, the assets she could claim, the settlement she was due. Love had never been part of the equation. Now, not even the pretense of it was necessary. Her coldness was a wall, and behind it, she plotted the strategy for her final move. One afternoon, Arthur found Olivia sitting in the garden, drawing in a notebook Eliza had bought for her. He approached quietly and sat on the grass beside her. For a long time, he just watched the colorful strokes she made on the paper. She was drawing a family, a man, a woman, and a little girl, all holding hands under a smiling sun. But the woman's face in the drawing was blank, an empty circle. "Who is that?" Arthur asked, pointing to the figure. Olivia shrugged. "I don't know," she whispered. "I can't remember Mommy's face." The confession hit Arthur with the force of a punch. He realized that in his obsession with building a secure financial future, with accumulating a fortune to guarantee Olivia's comfort, he had allowed the past, the memory of his first wife, the love that had bound them, to fade away. He stood up, his decision made. There was a place where the memories still lived, a treasure far more valuable than all the gold in his vaults. "Come," he said, holding out his hand to his daughter. "I'll show you." Arthur held Olivia's small hand, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't leading her to an obligation, but to a discovery. They crossed the silent mansion, past the dining room where the humiliation had occurred, up the grand marble staircase whose steps she used to count in whispers. He didn't take her to the bedroom wing, nor to the formal living rooms. Instead, he led her down a narrow, seldom-used hallway that ended at a single dark wood door. Arthur took a tarnished brass key from his pocket and inserted it into the lock. The sound of the metal turning seemed to echo through years of silence. The door opened to the attic, a gust of still air, smelling of cedar, dust, and memories enveloped them. It was a vast space, lit only by a single round window through which the grey daylight streamed, making dust particles dance like tiny diamonds. Old furniture, covered in white sheets, looked like sleeping ghosts. But Arthur didn't look at them. He went straight to a large, carved wooden chest in the center of the room. He knelt before it, the fabric of his expensive suit gathering dust, and gestured for Olivia to come closer. "Your grandfather made this chest," he said, his voice low. "He called it the treasure chest." He lifted the heavy lid. Olivia leaned in to look, perhaps expecting to find gold coins or sparkling jewels like in her storybooks. But the treasure within was of a different kind. The top compartment was filled with yellowed photographs, letters tied with faded satin ribbons, and a scrapbook with a blue velvet cover. Arthur took the scrapbook and opened it on his lap, revealing photos of a young woman with a smile that seemed to light up the aged paper. Her eyes were the same honey color as Olivia's. "This was your mother," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "She loved rainy days and the smell of wet earth. She sang off-key, but with so much joy that no one cared." He turned the pages slowly, telling the story behind each photo. A picnic in the park, a trip to the beach, the day they were married. They were stories of a life filled with love, not wealth. Olivia gazed at the images, and the blank face in her drawings began to take shape, to gain a smile, to come to life. Arthur then pulled a small baby book from the chest, with the name Olivia embroidered on the cover. He opened it to a page where a tiny lock of baby hair was taped down with a ribbon. Beside it, her mother's elegant script read, "For my little inheritance, the only asset that truly matters." Arthur couldn't hold back anymore. The tears he had suppressed for years finally came, silent and heavy. He wept for the wife he had lost and the daughter he had almost lost. Seeing the tears stream down her father's face, the fear that had held Olivia captive finally broke. She reached out her small hand and, with a gentleness that mirrored her mother's in the photos, wiped a tear from Arthur's cheek. He pulled her into a hug, and in that dusty attic, amidst the relics of a lost love, they found each other. The chasm between them was filled not by words, but by a shared understanding of their grief. For the first time, they were not a billionaire and his heiress daughter. They were just a father and a daughter, finding solace in one another. The silence that followed was no longer awkward, but peaceful. They remained in their embrace, the past and present merging in a moment of pure catharsis. It was then that a soft creak from the attic door made them look up. Veronica stood in the entrance, her face a mask of coldness. She wasn't looking at them, but at the open chest, at the treasure that couldn't be measured in dollars or euros. In her hand, she held a leather portfolio, and the smile that slowly formed on her lips held no trace of warmth. It was the smile of someone about to declare checkmate. Veronica's smile was a masterpiece of dissimulation, a veneer of triumph over a canvas of contempt. She stepped into the attic, her heels echoing on the wooden floorboards, shattering the sanctity of the moment between father and daughter. The leather portfolio in her hand looked like a weapon. She didn't see a heartbroken man or a child who had just rediscovered her mother's memory. She saw only a business partner in a vulnerable position, and to her, vulnerability was synonymous with opportunity. "What a moving scene," she said, her voice devoid of any genuine emotion, "a trip down memory lane. But while you were busy with the past, I was taking care of our future, or more precisely, mine." She placed the portfolio on a dust-covered crate and opened it. Inside were a series of documents, perfectly organized and bound. "My lawyers have been very efficient," she continued, her tone casual, as if discussing the returns on new applications. "This is a separation agreement, a fair and equitable division of assets, considering my contribution to the growth of your net worth. The image I built for us, the contacts I cultivated, all of it has a measurable value, a direct impact on your business profits. I consider the last few years an investment, and now it's time to collect my dividends." Arthur looked at the papers, then at her. The man who, days before, would have dove into those documents, analyzing every clause, every asset and liability, now felt only a profound weariness. The woman before him spoke not of a marriage, but of a business transaction. Their life together had been reduced to a balance sheet. He rose slowly, gently placing Olivia behind him, a protective shield. "You want the money," he said. It wasn't a question, but a statement. "I want what is mine by right," she corrected. "A fair share of the fortune, the real estate, the stocks, the funds. I want my capital so I can continue my life in the standard to which you've accustomed me." Arthur stared at her for a long moment, and a sad smile touched his lips. "You can have it all," he said, his voice calm and firm. Veronica blinked, caught off guard for the first time. "What? You can have the house, the cars, the money? Tell your lawyers to draft whatever they want. I'll sign it. Take the dollars, the euros, the gold. Take your inheritance of things." The ease with which he surrendered the wealth she coveted so deeply was the most devastating blow Veronica could have received. She had expected a fight, a negotiation, a war of attrition waged by accountants and lawyers. By refusing to fight, he emptied her victory of all meaning. He showed her that the treasure she was fighting for held no value for him. Her power had always resided in the belief that money was the measure of all things. And he, the billionaire, had just declared that measure to be an illusion. Veronica's mask finally fell, not in an explosion of rage, but in a stunned silence. She looked at the man before her, a man she had never truly known, and at the child who was the cause of her ruin. She saw his hand find Olivia's, a bond worth more than their entire combined net worth. There was nothing left to say. She took her papers, her separation agreement, her consolation prize. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the attic, her footsteps now sounding hurried, like an escape. Arthur and Olivia heard her descend the stairs, and soon after, the sound of the front door closing with a resounding finality. The poison had been purged from the house. In the silence that followed, Arthur knelt in front of his daughter. "It's over," he whispered. "Now it's just us." Veronica's departure didn't leave a vacuum, but opened up space for air to enter. In the days that followed, the great white mansion, once a monument to silence and opulence, began to transform into a home. The prevailing sound was no longer the ticking of an antique clock or the echo of footsteps on polished marble, but the sound of Olivia's laughter, a sound Arthur thought he had long forgotten. It was a melody worth more than all his assets combined. Eliza, with her quiet wisdom, orchestrated the transition. The flowers in the vases were no longer imposing, untouchable arrangements, but colorful, slightly messy bouquets that Olivia helped pick from the garden. The dining room table was used only once to celebrate the new beginning, as Eliza called it. After that, all meals were taken at the large wooden table in the kitchen, where the warmth from the stove and the smell of home cooking created a coziness no luxury could buy. Arthur discovered a universe that existed beyond cash flow spreadsheets and stock market quotes. He learned how to put Olivia's hair in a ponytail, though his fingers, accustomed to signing multi-million-dollar contracts, were clumsy with the hair tie. He learned that the most important part of his day wasn't the conference call with investors in Tokyo, but the hour he spent sitting on his daughter's bedroom floor, listening to her talk about the dragon she had drawn. He realized that for years he had been obsessed with building an inheritance of material things, accumulating a fortune to give her a secure future, when the only thing she truly needed was his present. The greatest dividend he had ever received in his life came not from a high-yield stock, but from the smile Olivia gave him when he finally managed to read an entire bedtime story without faltering. Olivia blossomed. The shrinking girl who moved like a shadow gave way to a child full of light. She ran through the hallways, left her toys scattered in the living room, and sometimes even got her dress dirty with paint or soil from the garden. Each little imperfection was, to Arthur, a sign of perfection, proof that life had returned to that house. He was still a billionaire, his net worth in dollars and euros continuing to grow out of inertia. But his definition of wealth had been irrevocably altered. His real treasure was not locked in vaults or invested in offshore funds. It was right there, running toward him for a hug when he came home at the end of the day. On that Sunday morning, the sun streamed through the kitchen window, painting the room in a warm, golden light. It smelled of pancakes and fresh coffee. Eliza hummed softly by the stove, while Arthur and Olivia sat at the table. Olivia was chattering excitedly about a dream she'd had about a talking bird, and Arthur listened with rapt attention, laughing at all the right moments. He took one of the golden pancakes, cut it into small pieces, and put it on her plate, just as he had done on that terrible night. But now the gesture was light, natural, an act of everyday love. He watched her take the first bite, her eyes shining with happiness. The simple, powerful image filled him with an emotion so overwhelming that he needed a moment to find his voice. He reached his hand across the table and touched her fingers, his heart overflowing with gratitude and remorse, with pain and a redeeming joy. "From now on," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you will never eat alone again.